Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guest are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the O.R. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, C.O.R.E. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National C.O.R.E. and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings, viewers. We had a glitch. This is the first one of this kind. Fortunately, Brother Ogawa pointed it out to us because on the screen it showed that we were live, but it wasn't hooking up to YouTube. So we're on. Hey. So I want to greet everybody and encourage people. As people come on, you type in, encourage people to hit the like button so you can trick these algorithms, because the algorithms here have slowed down for us. YouTube has a policy that if they don't like your message, they put you on a slow algorithm. You know what I mean? And so we're doing things to beat that, but I didn't expect them to love the message. So you got to do your high-tech stuff. I'm low-tech, intersecting with the high-tech generation. So you all come in. Ogawa has been one, and others, to do your thing. Push these numbers up. So today we have a guest whose life interest is really dear to me. Brother Ogawa is to be credited for identifying our guest. And once he told me her background, I said, give me her number, because I don't believe in talking to people on, your little Instagram or Facebook. I got to have a live connection. So let me talk to her, because the guest today is an activist scholar, community organizer, and professor at Virginia Tech's Department of Political Science, as well as the Gloria D. Smith Professor and Director of Africana Studies. And she has a special interest and life commitment to community organizing. And so we're privileged to have the beautiful, lovely Professor and Director of Africana Studies, Dr. Brandy Faulkner. Greetings, sister.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You know what I mean? real glad. You know what I mean? So we've hooked up a few times and we've had a chance to talk. And I really like your work. I
Thank
like
you.
your spirit. I like your consciousness. And there's a lot of people out here who are doing some real good work for our people.
Yeah.
And we don't even know who they are. And this is one I can promise you that if she's willing, she's going to be up here a lot. So
Absolutely.
you're going to get to know her quite well. You know what I mean? So it's a real privilege to have this opportunity to have an exchange with you. You know.
Likewise.
So to the viewers who have figured out what's going on and have hooked in, Brother Ogawa, Stephen McKenzie, and Gloria Briscoe, and Phenomonics, Phenomono Mix. So we can do some stuff with this language. It does need to be, um, juiced up because it can be kind of dead. But when it gets in our hands, we manage to Africanize it in different
No
kinds.
doubt. No doubt.
So this is going to be real nice. Before getting into this discussion, I just want to remind people that last week we had Professor Menu Ampin on, a good friend of mine who's one of the best young, of course, he's 60 probably now, but compared to some of us scholars out there who's been doing primary research. So last week, the topic was the origins of Kush discovered through primary research. And this brother had been in the Sudan, Egypt, Ethiopia, um, and Kenya for 6 weeks. And so you got to see some stuff from his research and some of the things he's come up with in terms of the culture. And he teaches at junior college here, where a former student of mine chaired the department, Carolyn Hodge, Contra Costa College, junior college, and he's a community scholar. So he's always reporting back to the community. And as you noted in the last show, he's doing a couple of trips, one to Egypt, I think another one to Ethiopia. Lashonda Henderson. Lashonda, do you know Lashonda? Randy? Do you
I
know?
don't.
Yeah, Lashonda is active in the Black United Front chapter in
Wonderful.
Washington, D.C. And
Great.
Lashonda Brandy was active in the chapter in Washington, D.C., and might be again, depending on what happens. So you two might want to hook up at some point.
Wonderful.
Lashonda is one of our conscious activist supporters who also puts her money where her mouth is and helps put this show on because I put a lot of money out of my pocket into this show.
Mm.
So a few people have put up some money to help me cover costs. That brother that saved us, that's a cost item for me. He gets paid.
Mhm.
And he saved me in a number of situations. So he proves that he's a good investment. So more of you, if you can make a monthly contribution, that would be nice. I want to note that our weekly viewership is going up, and we'll be doing other things to push it, but that's very good, and that's due to a lot of work that Brother Ugawa has done on different platforms. And I see Coco here. Coco, we're going to mail your second Art of Leadership book out. And they apparently, Coco got two books that were sent to her. The package was open. They took the Art of Leadership book out. And they took a check that I had sent her out as well. So my wife will be
Yes.
sending you um, another copy of the book because it wasn't our fault or your fault that the book was, you know, ripped off. And that's what we do. You know what I mean? You just deserve that. You're one of our real conscious sisters, but I don't care who bought it. I mean, you're going to get your stuff back, you know. So you should also know that this week at I think it was 9:30, in the evening. I was interviewed by Hoppy. It's a taped interview. Hoppy, for people that don't know it, is a very conscious program coming on YouTube. Some young people that are putting it on, and they are having a conference this coming Saturday that you should support. Black Excellence Conference. You should support them. And so they taped this. It's on ancient Kemet, and it's tying it into current issues today. So some of you that have heard me discuss this before, this is not exactly the same discussion because it's put in a different context. So check it out. Next, on the 18th of August, you're going to be privileged to be a part of a discussion with Dr. Raymond Winbush. Winbush is a very good brother who's a professor now in Baltimore, Maryland, and has taught at different Black colleges before. He's the author of an important book on reparations. He's the one that told me that I should pick up this book on Malcolm X, From the Dead Level, um, written by Les Payne. Les Payne is an award-winning journalist. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a brother for his journalistic work, but his book won a Pulitzer Prize. This is the replacement book for the autobiography. And Malcolm is not a subject that I treat lightly. He's my second master. Randy, have you seen this book?
Yes.
Read it? Have you read it?
Nope, I haven't read that one.
Yeah. Dr. Asa Hilliard said that this book eclipsed all books on Malcolm, but my book is on his political thoughts.
Okay.
And then you've had a brother on the show who was the expert on the assassination of Malcolm X, Babazak Kondo. And he
Okay.
went through the FBI files on Malcolm's assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Zak's book was inspired by mine, and I read his draft and gave him some comments, but I knew it was outstanding. So all authorities on the assassination concede that he is the master. And we have an over 3-hour discussion between the two of us that you should watch. Those of you that haven't watched it, not one dislike. And he definitely clearly makes it clear who killed Malcolm. And it's not a popular conclusion. And yet there was not one negative comment. And there are hundreds of comments on this show. And this came on 2 years ago because he did his homework. His work was so good. He didn't tell me this, but Menu Ampin, who was also doing work at Morgan State, which is where Dr. Raymond Winbush is now, he knew that Zach Kondo had told his family that he'd probably be killed as a result of this. I'm not going to tell you by who, because you think you know. It's not who you think. Right? And fortunately, because of some things that had changed, he wasn't. If certain things hadn't changed, that was kind of like, that took a lot of guts to write that book. So this discussion with Dr. Raymond Winbush, we'll be going through some of the main conclusions that Les Payne reaches on Malcolm's autobiography. And what he did is go through sources that Malcolm cites in the autobiography. But he went and interviewed all of them. He interviewed over 400 people. And this was a 28-year research project. He died before the book came out. His daughter finished it and put it out. So this is a groundbreaking, deservedly award-winning book, and it is the replacement for the autobiography. And by the way, when Spike Lee was getting ready to do the film on Malcolm, I sent him a letter and telling him that he should be careful. Don't exclusively rely on the autobiography for the film. I knew some things that no other scholar knows, and I'm not telling it until I do the rewrite on this book, that led me to say that. And he dismissed him. By the way, talking to John Henry Clark informed me that Spike Lee came to visit him because he was an advisor to Malcolm. And this is what happened. Here's this rich opportunity to interview Malcolm's major advisor on African policy, a person who, is an authority on top of an authority on a whole lot of stuff. And so Spike sits down to get an interview. And so John Henry Clark is typical jazz like, so he threw a curve. He said, to understand Malcolm, you have to understand his silences. That's telling you a lot. That means he listened, you know. Spike Lee said, I can't film silences, and left. Didn't interview John on anything. You know what I mean? So watch this. This is going to be important. Now I have a news item, and we'll get into the discussion with Randy Faulkner. And this is an extremely important discussion we're going to have here. Extremely important because it's got to do with how do we build power among our people. How's that done? How's it being done? And how does it need to be done? So I just wanted to bring in one news item, and Brandy here is dealing with this in her way based on the state in which she's in, Virginia, old Virginia.
Old Virginia.
Capital of Confederacy. So the College Board, and the College Board is the group that high school students, when they're, testing for college, it's one of the College Board kind of exams and papers that they can write that it enhances their opportunity to score well on admissions tests and stuff like that. So the College Board this last Wednesday, announced officially that its new advanced placement course in African American studies was going to undergo some changes. And this had come after Governor DeSantis of Florida and other right-wing governors had put pressure on them. And this is supposed to be an objective body. Of course, there's no such thing as objectivity. Skip Gates had endorsed the original concept of the content. And you all know my views of Skip Gates, but apparently his view on this was okay. He was supportive of what they generally had. But when this finally comes out, the College Board had removed Black writers and scholars aligned with so-called critical race theory. Well, first of all, they know Black scholars align with it. Unless you're in law school, it's not taught. This is just pure bull. They've just created this scare thing for white people that Black studies, Black thought, criticism of anything you've done wrong, which is a whole lot, is going to get your mama. You know what I mean? And then turn that into a big election scare. And then the corporate media blows this up like it's real. Critical race theory, something taught in law schools barely. I went to law school. I didn't get no critical race theory. So what some of the exclusions from this curriculum are particularly around current Black politics that are threatening, as they see it, to the status quo. So any reference to Black Lives Matter, any references to so-called queer studies, and any references to feminism. And, you would expect them, since they don't like women, especially Black, brown, red, or yellow, but they don't like women, period. Patriarchy, that's anti-female, So I could see why they just want women removed. They're kind of like the Greeks that thought heaven existed when there were no women. Explain that one to me. Huh? We'd have no blues if that was our philosophy. The Black man blues because he can't get the right Black woman, and the Black woman blues because the things ain't just right with her, man, and sometimes they are. You know what I mean? But the theme is male and female. You know what I mean? Whatever issues we got, that's what we like. You know what I mean? Huh? So this is the first thing that they've done. And then there are some other things that have been done with this. Um, the College Board revised a 234-page curriculum framework. So the content on Africa, slavery, Reconstruction, and the Civil Rights Movement, they say remains largely the same, though I think you'd have to look at that to see and even see if it's a correct context to begin with. And there is content on redlining, discrimination, and Afrofuturism, whatever that is, as well as stories of individual achievements and heroism. Okay. But the study of contemporary topics, anything that involves kicking the systems behind, you understand? Like Black Lives Matter, incarceration, that is the prison industrial complex, queer studies, reparations, huh? Reparations. America forced Germany to do reparations to Israel. But someone like Obama, when he got in office, said he was opposed to it. I'm sure that wasn't his personal opinion, but he didn't want to offend white people. But Biden had to say he was for it because we were his difference between life and death, South Carolina. So he had to say it. Expect him to do anything, don't hold your breath. So these are some subjects that have been, they say, downgraded. You know what downgraded means? Eliminated. So Brandy, you want to make any comments on this?
Yeah, that's been a big topic here in my state because while most of the attention has been on Governor DeSantis and his decision to completely ban that AP curriculum from Florida public schools, my governor as well is headed in that direction. In fact, he got elected because of critical race theory and the fear that it caused here in our state. He ran on an anti-C.R.T. platform, vowed that if he was elected, that there would be no mention of it in our public schools, and that all of this business about diversity and anti-racism and white guilt would disappear. And the white masses got behind him, and that is why he was able to win the election. And he promptly followed through with exactly what he had promised. He introduced a series of executive orders as he came into office that took away all of those things, especially the things that the prior governor had put in place, like a committee that was designed to oversee Black and African American history in the public schools and do some diversity-based work. They disappeared. He completely removed all of their reports, any reference to them, took it all away. So he is moving in the same direction. And I'm actually sitting here just waiting for his statement that Virginia will join Florida in banning this curriculum. So it isn't surprising. I mean, we know how this goes. People who have tried to erase us historically, that's nothing new. But they are really being successful right now with their, my governor called it's a pro-parent choice movement. That's how he's framing it. We need to put
the parent choice movement.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. But he is saying that the parents need to be able to choose, not the woke people, right? And so we're seeing that erasure again. And as someone who works in Africana studies, he has targeted identity-based programs, and we don't know what our existence is going to look like here in the state and in our public universities in the months and years to come. So yes, this is a really important issue.
Yeah, and I think it's obvious that this is electioneering stuff that
Yes.
can allow the right wing to try and beat up on any opposing candidates.
Yes.
Around trying to equate anything that's black, brown, red, or yellow with history, culture, resistance, or anything else. with an attack on whites, with racism, with anything they can label it as. That's part of it. But I think the underlying thing here is the demographic shift in this country.
Yes.
And, the whole fear that whiteness is going down the tubes as privilege and as power and control. And an example, you were saying this has happened before. I'm tightening up on my book that I'm finishing on SEBA, and I've just finished doing a little tightening up on this book by author Schlesinger, The Disuniting of America, Reflecting on Multicultural Society. You familiar with this book?
Yeah.
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 This is a propaganda piece done by American Express. This is every chapter has an American Express person leading the chapter, which is telling you the corporate nature of this whole thing. And then Schlesinger's whole thing. So Schlesinger was basically arguing that African-centered thought, because this was in the middle of the African-centered cultural renaissance in the 80s and 90s. And it was particularly in response to a movement that I led in the National Black United Front around getting African curriculum into the public schools around what was called the African American baseline essays. You familiar with that, Brandy? The baseline essays?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was in effect saying, because this baseline essays covered the whole curriculum in the public schools with a comedic framework behind it. So science, history, politics, whatever, music, language arts. So he was saying that to include this into the public school curriculum is to disunite America. And then he said, because what's being put in is propaganda being used to boost Black egos, saying that it had nothing to do with scholarship, history, or truth. And then he's going to go on to critique this, but he prefaces his critique by saying he knows absolutely nothing about African history. Huh? And these are the know-nothings that are pushing this right now. So, yeah, it's kind of like history repeating itself.
Yes.
We beat that one back, and this is one that's going to have to be fought again, because that's one of the big gains of the 60s. Black consciousness produced Black studies. And it didn't get into the public schools enough. This movement we led, it did up to a point, but not enough, you know? Any further comments on that?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. Whenever we make just a little bit of progress, there's a lot of pushback. It just reminded me, as you were talking about that, of Mary Lefkowitz and her book, Not Out of Africa, when she just went after all of our brilliant scholars. And we see this happening over and over again. And I think you're right. Even though it's not being taught in public schools that much, most of it just comes under this big umbrella of diversity initiatives. It's still a pathway forward, and now they're taking that away. So I think we got to be prepared. We really have to be prepared for what I think is going to come next.
Yeah, this is kind of like white people's Custer's last stand.
Yeah.
And in the movement, we had a saying, you know, we're Sitting Bull, we're not Custer. Custer got wiped out. And a lot of this is reaction to the victories that we achieved against so-called white supremacy in the 60s, which was the first real defeat of apartheid in this country. It was the first defeat. And the new right wing itself, Trump and many others, feel dispossessed because of this. And we often don't, you understand it, Brandy, but a lot of our people, particularly our conscious Afrocentric people that ain't activists, and some others who are just sitting around looking at stuff, don't appreciate the fact we kicked some butt.
You did.
The response to it, but the clock can't be turned back on this one. Yes. So now let's get into today's show, which I've been looking forward to having this discussion. for a while. The topic for today is building Black political power through community organizing. Now, I want to make 2 points here. This topic will speak to politics in a broader sense than you think, one. And two, it will also include economic empowerment. But because the major focus of what's been going on for the last few years has been around political organizing, we'll focus on that, but we're also going to bring in the economic component. There are others that we can't deal with here because this is just the beginning of a discussion. So, one of the things that I like to do, and it's a habit of an organizer, but it was also Sister Ella Baker's habit. And I didn't get this from her. This is our culture. So you're going to do this, you know. Ella, Miss Baker, because she was called Miss Baker. Miss Baker would get to know you around a dinner table because she said basically when you feed people, you know, that's when you get to know them, you know. And her first question, which is one I'm dropping on you, would be, who are you? And what she meant by who are you is, who's your family? That's an African question.
Yes.
You know, African people, that's going to be the first question they ask you. White people, usually it's going to be, what's your job? What's your profession? Blah, blah. You know what I mean? Surface stuff. But we want to get down to the roots of the thing. So I'm asking you, tell us about your family background and how that influenced you as a person.
Yeah. So I come from a very closely knit family. My great grandparents were sharecroppers in Virginia and worked very, very, very hard and eventually got a small piece of land from the people that they sharecropped from and was able to pass that on to my grandmother and my grandfather. And they too became farmers. And this is actually on both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side. I come from a family of farmers. And they really understood the importance of being independent in as much as you can under this kind of a system, and self-sufficient. And I grew up in that kind of a community, a lot of hard work on the land. Our family's crop was tobacco, in addition to cattle and pigs. So a lot of people, I think, would look at that and go, "What? She's out there playing with cows and pigs?" And yes, that's how I grew up. We grew up on the land, and we worked the land, and that became our source of income. And that's how my family made their living. And so, because that kind of a work takes a lot of hands, there are always a lot of people around me. And that was, of course, I didn't think about it at the time, but as I got older, I really began to think about the influence of having so many family members and neighbors and neighborhood folks who would come over some days and say, "Look, to my grandfather, I need some money this week. You got any work for me? Can I get on the tractor? Can I help pull some of the tobacco?" And it would help them out. And you would hear so many stories. My family had so many stories. Now, I'm not sure all of them were true, but we did get to hear, the children got to hear, as we stood there helping, a lot of stories about how things used to be and how they had grown up and what lessons they had learned in life. And they passed all of that down to us. And I just think about the closeness. And it's one of the things that I noticed instantly when I went off to college and everybody kind of siloed and it became about me as an individual. And we lost those kinds of connections as we went through these institutional processes. But that's my people. I am from a family of sharecroppers in rural Virginia. and I loved it.
Right on.
Yeah.
Was there any activism in your family?
hmm Um, I guess in their own way, some of them were activists. I would not classify any of them as organizers. They just didn't make it to that point. But as far as standing up against injustices, absolutely. And most of it was done through the churches. It was the churches that they depended on to inform them actually about what was going on and to figure out what they wanted to do about it collectively. So yeah, they were active, but not to the point of organizing.
One of the things that I think you probably know is that activists, especially in the South, but in the North, but especially in the South, some of your strongest people who
Mhm,
played very important roles in movements,
mhm,
they came out of families that had some kind of economic independence. Not
mhm,
all of them.
mhm. Yeah.
Fannie Lou Hamer was dirt poor, and
Mhm.
that didn't affect her ability to fight. In fact, if it
Yeah.
anything, it inspired her to fight.
Mhm,
But that independence, Ella Baker, for example, came from a landowning family, and they
mhm,
subdivided land and shared stuff with their community.
mhm,
So that
mhm,
that also tends to shield the children from some of the stuff that a lot of blacks would get exposed to. Did you
mhm.
find that coming up in your case?
Yeah, in some instances, because we weren't all in the same situation, there were some who did have land, but there were also a lot of families in our area who had come from the same circumstances as my great grandparents and got cheated out of their land.
Right.
Um, that happened a lot, and they had no way of proving what agreements were in place, and even if they could have at that time, it wouldn't have made a difference.
Mhm.
So not everybody was able to hold on to any land whatsoever.
Right.
And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, there was a certain protection for women
hmm
because usually if you owned your own land, your wives didn't have to go work for white people,
hmm
particularly white men, and
hmm
be subject to sexual things like rape and stuff like
hmm
that.
hmm
And your children could have more space to grow. And Ella Baker, for example,
hmm
she actually hit the sheriff's son, and the family encouraged it. You know what I mean? And the sheriff didn't do anything about it. You know what I
hmm
mean?
Yeah.
So that environment really made a difference. Now, I was
hmm
telling you, my people are from Virginia on my
Yes.
father's side. My family tree goes back to 1865. My
hmm
slave name was William Bradley Jr., William Henry Bradley Jr. My father's name was William Henry Bradley Sr. So
hmm
when I took the name Obitashaka, that was kind of a shockwave for him. He was very conscious, but it was that was his name. But I was proud of that name too.
hmm
But I was trying to embrace my African conscience. But the key
Yes.
point is Virginia,
hmm
baby, by way of
Right.
Madagascar. My people on both sides of the family come from Madagascar. On my mother's
Okay.
side,
Yeah.
Mississippi.
Wow. Okay.
Mississippi.
Okay.
My
Southern
grandmother was
roots.
one proud black woman, and her mother, they called her a Wampus cat. My mother didn't know what that meant. I said, Wampus cat means she could kick the behind of a man, and she could. She was ramrod straight, 6 foot tall. She was the enforcer in the family. So yeah, so
Yeah.
my father was a sharecropper, and
Okay.
he came out of Bunkie, Louisiana, a town so small that if you close your eyes, you can't see it when you pass by it.
hmm
And he worked a plantation in Orange,
hmm
Texas. And
hmm
at 12 years old, he whipped the behind of the plantation owner's son,
hmm hmm
which was a lynching offense. He was warned that he'd be lynched. The next day, the owner gave him a job that didn't involve picking cotton and
Oh wow.
paid more. My father was a fighter. You know what I mean?
Amazing what a little bit of inspiration can do.
Yeah. He fought with his fist, refused to fight in World War II.
Yeah,
You know? He
yeah.
said, "Wouldn't kill no Japanese." they looked just like him. Wasn't kill no Germans. They didn't have no Southern accent, hadn't lynched their men or raped their women. Give him a gun, he'd shoot every one of them. And my father was a street guy, but he was prohibited from ever cursing in the house. My mother enforced that. I don't curse around women. My wife thinks I don't curse. Well, think another story. You know what I mean? And that is an unconscious pickup from family. So yeah, family has a big thing.
Yeah, for
Are
sure.
your parents still alive?
They are. They are. When my grandmother got old enough and decided that she didn't want to do the farming anymore, she went to work as a janitor at the high school that I went to. And so after that, most of them became domestic workers, and that was good for me because I got to go down and get lunch money every day.
Oh, okay. Oh, I bet you were a good student.
I tried to be.
Yeah, I bet you were. So let's get into this discussion of community organizing.
Mhm.
First of all, how do you define community organizing? What's your overall approach and definition?
Yeah. So for me, community organizing is a method of trying to win changes that requires us to be centered in the communities that we're working in so that we can focus on directly affected people, the people who are actually suffering the harms and so many of the tragedies that we sometimes just talk about in the abstract. These are the people who know all too well what can happen when things remain the same. And so, as organizers, we want to make sure that we are connecting with directly affected people, hearing how they view the world, what things they want to change, and what they think is necessary to change them. And it's a process that requires a whole lot of listening, a lot of listening and connecting and being willing to put yourself aside and not having this, well, I know best attitude, really taking your cues from the people that you're working with. And when you're able to start those conversations with one person, then two people, and then five people, and then 100 people, you begin to see the patterns, and they begin to see the patterns. And they start to build power through their interactions. And often we talk about how we can't win because somebody is so much more powerful than we are, or they have so much money and we don't. But when you are focusing on the people power, you learn that you can win with people power. When you get a group of people together who are really committed, who really have skin in the game, who are willing to put in the time, effort, and energy that it takes to sustain a movement, you can win. And that's what organizing is about. It's about coming together to figure out the best strategy and set of tactics to win.
Well put. Well put.
Yeah.
And what you're saying basically is you're organizing around what the people want,
Yes,
not what you want.
absolutely.
That is real key. I mean, that is
Yes.
key to success.
Hmm.
But it's also what organizing should mean, as
Hmm.
opposed to someone coming in with all the answers, because chances are you haven't got them. It's the people who are living through that every day that know that. And listening is real key because
Hmm.
it's very different from just hearing and listening. You got to really put yourself in the position of the people that you're having an exchange with to understand
Hmm.
where they're coming from. And that's where growth comes. That's
Yes.
where you really grow in that interaction.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think people aren't used to being heard in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take the time to sit down with them and really hear them, you learn fairly quickly. They're so smart.
Mm-hmm.
They're so smart and so capable, and they're not asking anybody to do for them. They're capable of doing for themselves. And it's just so beautiful, I think, to be part of that kind of a process that really centers directly affected people.
And I think implied, and what you also said was that power is in the people.
Yes.
A lot of us think,
Yes.
oh, it's in the vote. Yeah, vote's fine. I'm not knocking voting, but it's really in the community among the people themselves.
Mhm.
And the proof of the pie is that every change we've had that
Mhm.
affected Black folks positively came from the people. Not
Has to.
legislation was, even when
Mhm.
it was legislation, it was forced by the people. That's
Absolutely.
a real key point
Absolutely.
you're making,
Yeah.
you know?
Organized people plus organized resources. We can
Mhm,
win.
mhm. Right on. So what
Yeah.
inspired you to get into community organizing?
Yeah. So I started organizing after I realized that my activism wasn't enough. Um, I was aware, I knew some things. Um, I always showed up to the protests. I voted my heart out, and it wasn't producing the change. And so I felt pretty good about being engaged, but there was something missing. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew that wasn't the way. And then I started really hearing Kwame Ture, and he would always say, "You got to get in organizations. You've got to get in organizations. You've got to organize." And I listened. I listened. But there was a problem. I didn't know what I was doing. So, and neither did anybody around me. And so I started searching. I started reading anything I could get my hands on. I tried to reach out to people who had way more experience with that than I had. And that's actually how I came across your book, The Art of Leadership, which really saved me and my team, because I was mostly doing work as an individual. And once I started realizing that we had to build together in these organized teams, and we all started reading your work, then it made a difference. We could sit down and create a plan. We could think through what kind of strategy we needed to get whatever change we were working on. And most importantly, we could tap into that legacy of competence. We could see how others had done it. You know, you talk a lot about Malcolm and Ella, and those are people that we need to be studying and taking a look at how they did things. And it doesn't mean that we have to do them exactly the same way. Certainly, there is room for change, but it gives us that foundation. And after really figuring that out, I haven't looked back. And so we've been able, I think, to do some really good things through our organizing processes.
You know, I was, I'm a spiritual person, among other things. I had a
Mhm.
life reading. It was
Mhm.
1982. And
Mm.
so the guy had predicted the books I would write. He didn't know I was
Mhm.
already writing them. And so
Okay.
one of them, he said, people around the country are going to want you to leave some stuff on leadership and organizing
Yeah.
so they can use it. Well, I was already doing that. I didn't tell him because I wasn't telling him how accurate he
Mhm.
was
Mhm.
in his reading.
Mhm.
But my point was, it took 10 years to write
Mhm.
volume one and two of The Art of Leadership, was
Mhm.
because I had 30 years of experience. So that book was based on levels. The first level was my experience, 30 years. The next level was the experience of Black people in this country.
Yeah.
The next level was the experience of Africans, people of color, anybody in the world
Mhm.
that used something that worked. And since I had a computer, I could always cut and
Mhm.
paste. That was a 10-year project. And so my hope was that
Mhm.
people like you
Mhm.
would use it. And so
Mhm.
that that's part of the fulfillment of it. And
Mhm.
so I'm
Mhm.
glad to see that. And
Yeah.
that was the
Yeah.
point. That was the
Yeah.
point. So,
Yeah. What
right on.
what what was it that made you think about writing that type? I mean, the two-volume work on this subject is remarkable. And when I was looking for things to read, there was hardly anything written by Black people. And wow, that's really a shame. And so, what made you decide that this was something that our community needed?
Well, I could see it. And
Yeah.
then coming out of the movement and being a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
while I had people around me who were masters in
Mm-hmm.
different areas of organizing and different areas of life, there was no systematic process for
Yeah.
development, but there was
Mm-hmm.
because it was coming out of the culture that I
Yeah.
saw a need to be able to pass this on to the younger generation, particularly which this was aimed at. I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The book came out in 1990, so I had a book signing in Baton Rouge.
Okay.
And it's a brother who was a doctor. He ran for mayor, and his wife was a PR person. So we're at a little book signing dinner. And so she gets a call from Mississippi, and some Black people in Mississippi have got a campaign going on.
Mm.
And so, in the midst of their campaign, they stopped, and some of them were asking, should they go on? So, somebody opened the book of The Art of Leadership, and it was a piece I remember because what that book is sometimes me taking an experience and then generalizing it. And so, I was telling people that in struggle, you're going to have people from your own group that are going to oppose you.
Yes.
And some of that represents class contradictions in the
Yeah.
Black community.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you have to do is overcome that, understand that
Mm-hmm.
you got to stick with the people and, stay on their interests. And so they picked that up, then they read that, and then they said, we're going out. And then they did that. And then they called her to tell her that. And I said, right on. That's why I
Right
wrote,
on. Yeah.
right on. And so hooking up with you, because
Mhm.
I consider you young, though you don't.
I'm not young.
You are, but you don't. But young compared to what? Have you heard that song? Compared to what? Roberta
True.
Flack. So compared to what?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that has been my major concern. And then I knew things were changing in the Black
Mm-hmm.
community. Different type of leadership had to be developed and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So that was the reason. And it was
Okay.
systematic because I knew there are different ways that they'll take you out
Yeah.
if you don't cover different areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also part of the reason. And now uh, I've set up a leadership training
Yeah.
institute that I hope to have you help me develop and move around the country because not coming in telling people what to do, but helping to polish people on
Mm-hmm.
what they need. Sir,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly. Yes.
have experience and knowledge and have a whole bunch of teams of people like you
Mm-hmm.
will travel. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And guess
Yes.
what? Kick the
It's so
stuff.
exciting. That is so exciting.
Yeah. So I look forward to that with you.
Yeah.
So who were some of the major influences that influenced you in community organizing? You have any?
Mm-hmm. So Kwame Ture would have to be at the top of that list because once I started reading and studying a little bit more about this specifically, it brought me to a lot of organizations, right? Looking at, for example, what had happened with S.N.C.C and how they had chosen to approach things and looking at Southern Christian Leadership Conference and what they were doing, and then trying to figure out how these organizations were maneuvering, sometimes with each other, sometimes in opposition to each other, and how they grew and developed over time. So I always saw him as being a pretty good model for what organizing was all about. And of course, you mentioned Ella Baker, Septima Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer and Septima Clark. Those are people that I really look to as really good grassroots level organizers.
Yeah. Kwame Ture was a friend of mine. He stayed at
Mm.
my house a number of times. I put
Mm.
security on his butt. His organization was not going to have his clock cleaned on our watch. He didn't like that because he wanted to go out and see the girls and stuff. We said, we don't care about your girlfriends. You're staying alive. And we would have our discussions. I led the Black Nationalist Wing in C.O.R.E.
Yeah.
He led it. He became the spokesperson for
Mhm.
Black Power. And some of my viewers have heard this, you haven't. Kwame told me that when he was on the March Against Fear, the James Meredith March in Mississippi, so he's up getting ready to give a speech. And so a brother named Willie Ricks, he's changed his name now, he's a very conscious, beautiful brother. He whispers in his ear, he said, "Say Black Power." And Stokely said, then Stokely, later Kwame Ture, he said, "I don't know whether I should say that. Willie kind of crazy." He had asked Willie to come to that march. He didn't tell me that. I found that out because he wanted some seasoned organizers with him. And Willie had gone to the former executive director of S.N.C.C, James Foreman, to clear this with him. He said, "What do you think if I introduce Black Power on this march? Will it be okay?" See, that was consulted. And Foreman said, "Yeah, it's a good idea." Now, Willie Ricks, and every time I saw Stokely, later Kwame Ture, Willie I've never met, but I'm in contact with him on Facebook. But Stokely, later Kwame Ture, I forgot to tell him. Guess where the term Black Power came from? Some people that's watched this show have heard this before, but nobody else knows this. Guess where, you know, there was a book on it and stuff, but guess where it came from? Got any idea?
Oh, tell us. Well, tell me, since everybody else has heard this before.
A lot of them haven't, because we have new viewers. So a lot of
okay, good.
Heard it.
Good.
A friend of mine, Paulu, who was a special kind of engineer, comes out of the Caribbean, had been in the parliament in his country until he cussed out the Queen and got thrown out. He was traveling in Africa, and he knew Malcolm when he was going to this engineering school. It's an engineering school where you use the raw materials in a village to build the village. Okay. And he was a primary organizer of the Sixth Pan-African Congress. Beautiful brother, passed on a few years ago. So he ran into Malcolm. And this was in '64 when Malcolm was doing his trips in Africa. And Malcolm said this: "Adam Clayton Powell and I are going to call a Black Power conference. Could you come?" He said, "No, I won't be able to come." But the key point is, Willie Ricks heard Black Power from Adam Clayton Powell when he went to the conference at Howard University. But that came from Malcolm. You know, if those two are collaborating, you know where that idea came from. You know what I mean? So the root of that, I never got to tell Kwame Ture, he's in heaven now, he knows. Him and Malcolm have talked, so they know. You know what I mean? Malcolm was at the root. We all knew his spirit was there, but that's where it came from.
Wow. I hadn't heard that story before, ever.
It's a little movement story there. Yeah. And Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer was one beautiful sister. One beautiful sister. And she's an expression of what I would call grassroots African-American nationalism. So was Ella Baker in a different way. In a different way. Yes. They were real expressions of our people's culture. She was one tough sister and very spiritual too. She was a spirit woman, you know.
Never back down. I love it.
This is an intergenerational discussion. We'll be having some stuff about comparing periods and stuff. Talk about the historical times that you come out of and how it's influenced you, how you see this particular period has influenced you.
Yeah, so, I work with a lot of organizers here who are brand new to organizing, and they really aren't aware in many instances of how our folks have really struggled to produce so much through organizing. Most of them, if you've gone through the public school systems here, you might learn a little bit during Black History Month, right? Once a year, and it's always going to be civil rights movement, right? That's just how the curriculum works here. And so when I start to try to connect to that legacy and the past and everything that people like you have done, they're always fascinated to learn about these connections. And that's really at the core of what I do. I try to look at what has been successful from our history, figure out organizationally what we can bring forward. And I think that's been pretty successful. But also having to think about what the really young people see as their way forward. And sometimes it's consistent with our past, and sometimes it isn't. And I'm often trying to navigate that space. Okay. Am I being too tied to tradition, or am I closing off some of the possibilities for the here and now? And I constantly ask myself that question as I'm interacting with a lot of young people who are very, very ambitious, very committed, very passionate organizers, right? But the important thing for me, and the approach that I take, is to make sure that I am always centered in the communities and in African ways. Um, for me, there really isn't a separation. I know that some people see them as being entirely different, but the cultural component to organizing for me is very, very important. Um, and so that's something that I always hope to bring to the work that I do. I don't see them as being separate.
So I get your point about you're not young, in that you're dealing with people a lot younger than you, and
Yes.
they're coming out of a different reality,
Hmm.
and you're kind of like an elder to them and
Yes.
bringing in some stuff beyond your own time.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
get that. I get that
Hmm.
real clear. I wanted you to react to this con- uh, comment by Five Star Review. Blacks
Okay.
in this generation are caught in the trap of the mass protests. Our ancestors did not believe in mass protests of any kind. This tactic was created by our enemies. You want to respond
Mhm.
to that?
Yeah. Um, oh goodness, this may have been 3, 4 months ago. I had a group of youth that I was talking to say to me, I feel like I got tricked a couple of years ago. And when I asked what they meant about that, they said we were expected, it was demanded almost that we go out and protest after what happened to George Floyd. And that's exactly what I did. And now things are still happening, right? It didn't do anything. This is what they're saying to me. And I asked them, well, okay, why were you protesting? What did you hope to gain from that? And they didn't know. And they were very honest about that. They said, well, everybody else was out there, so I thought that's what I should do. And people were telling me I had to go do it. And I think because I've been there too, right? And I thought about that. Protesting is a tactic, right? It's not a strategy. And I think sometimes we do use it as a strategy. And we can become tied to our favorite tactics, not just protesting, but there are people who engage in other forms of direct action resistance, like sit-ins and things like that. And um, we can really develop tunnel vision, I think, when we just leave it there. Um, I happen to think that protesting is a very good way to bring attention to a situation, but it's also an opportunity to build a base, right? But if you just sit there and protest, nothing happens from that. But if you use it as an opportunity to start building power so that people who leave those protests can go back and actually do the work, then the protest is worth it. So I don't count out protests. I just think they have to be used in a very particular context. They should be used to build power. They aren't the end all be all of what we're supposed to be doing. And I think a lot of young people are figuring that out. They're really starting to figure that out. So that gives me a lot of hope.
And I think we, number one, need to distinguish between mobilizing and organizing. So a
Yes.
mass protest that may be a march or a series of marches is a mobilization. A mobilization is where you're bringing people out and you're making some kind of statement, demand, or whatever.
Yes.
It's also a way you're channeling anger in the community and trying to get change. But mobilizing can be and should be used as a precondition for organizing. But mobilizing itself produces change. And to say that it comes from white people, resistance comes from oppression. That's where
Agree.
that comes from. And
Yes.
so there are various forms of resistance. So Garvey, that was a mass mobilization movement around the
Yeah.
freedom of Africa. If you look at the independence movement of Kwame Nkrumah, that was mass protest called positive action. And it produced the independence of Ghana. And if you look at what King did in the march, that was a mobilization. He came up with a method that actually worked. It got you civil rights legislation and voting legislation. So,
Agree.
you wrong. Dead wrong. She's being nice with you. I ain't gonna be nice. I'm gonna tell you, get up off your butt and do something. Because if you rule that out, and then if you rule out the other methods, then all you have is to sit back on your TV or read a book. And you need to read a book to take some action. So you're intelligent. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
mobilization and organizing, it depends upon the issue. It depends upon what you're trying to achieve. In the North, King's method in the San Francisco freedom movement, we only used it once, the mobilizing method, because we had an economic movement. So it was a different thing. So strategies come out of particular sets of conditions that will work. And under certain conditions, mobilizing can work. And one of
Yes.
the things that happen is, you want to say it ain't work? Well, Trump ain't in the White House.
Yes.
The mobilization of not just Black Lives Matter, but all those networks, along with this fumbling and bungling of COVID-19, put in what should be in the doghouse, ready for the jailhouse. You know what I mean?
Agree.
So
Agree. Yeah.
don't underestimate that.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah.
underestimate it.
I agree. I'm sorry. Give me 1 sec. My computer is blinking at me, so I'm going to change my power cord.
Okay.
I'll step away just a second.
So while we're doing that, I just want to say that there are various strategies and tactics that when you apply them can work. And that's the art of organizing, you know what I mean? And mobilizing. It's suiting the strategy to the particular condition. Haya Hekwa said a boycott's a good strategy, depending on the circumstances, yeah. 5-star review. Dr. King was the author of the mass protests. These protests have got us nothing. We're still talking about voting rights. Zionists creating the mass protest. First of all, the protests got us the end of legal apartheid in the South before that was dismantled in South Africa. Secondly, it got us the right to vote. And thirdly, it's done a whole lot of other things. And that was stuff we innovated with. Wasn't no Zionists that did it or anything else. And the Zionists, they didn't get Israel through no mass protests. The Zionists got Israel because it was delivered to them by the US and Britain, and through the Balfour Declaration and other things. And so it's because of that that you have Israel. It wasn't mass demonstrations. And I had another comment here. Norman Brown, grits and gripes let people tell you what they want and need. A great organizing tool. Norman Brown, as I pointed out to you before, is the brother that woke me up. And grits and gripes, he's referring to San Francisco Freedom Movement when we organized block by block that hasn't been done anywhere else in the country. One of the formats they had, and we had 45,000 Black people organized under this format of organizing. Then there was a thing where the people got to express their views. It was called Grits and Gripes. And that was laying out issues so that we could organize on them later. And so that was a case of mobilizing to tap into the thinking of the people. Um, so that's key. Also, I would say this: mobilizing with this generation reflects the fact that some have learned that this technique worked before; they're using it again. But in the case of the Southern movement, but in this case, they're using it in this case because of the nature of police violence and stuff. This has been a format through which people could stand up and do something. And this has broken the period of the hip hop generation where it wasn't clear that they had their own direction. And it becomes clear, starting with some of the early movements against police violence, that people found their voice. And it was through these mass movements against police violence, among other things. Yeah, well, I'm not going to go any more into response to this. Coco makes the point. We also have to acknowledge it's not mass protest that doesn't work. It's that neoliberal fascist state counterinsurgency that prevents us from assuming political power. Yeah, and also, what do you mean by works? Do you mean that we have to have our full freedom, and if we don't, nothing works? Then that's viewing things from an either or perspective, because change doesn't occur overnight. And so, one of the things in organizing is identify the issues you're organizing around, have strategies that are directed to achieving them, and then that produces change, you know? And so, mass protest is just one. So, mass protest, as someone just said, could be a boycott. The San Francisco Freedom Movement was the only Northern movement that was successful, and it was one that defeated an entire economic power structure through various types of strategies. We didn't have just one, but one that worked was a boycott. In certain cases, that worked. But we defeated an entire corporate power structure. Had we sat on our butts, we would not have a single job because blacks had none then. So, mass protests produced Ghana's independence. By the way, mass protests produced most of Africa's independence. So I think that you need to understand that, you know. So this is a key point, you know, a real key point, that this has to happen. And if I get excited every now and then, I've been in this struggle 63 years, and if you say what we've been doing that has produced results is a waste of time, I'm going to show you that it isn't. You know what I mean? That's me, and I hope you get it. Brandy is hooking herself up, and she's coming back on in a minute. See if there are any other. See if there are any other. Okay, here's Brandy again. Okay, you hooked up.
Am I back in?
Yeah, you're in.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful.
Okay. So, what inspired you to combine community organizing with scholarship, and which, if any of these two, has taken a priority for you?
That's a really good question. For me, because I didn't have any background whatsoever in organizing, I had to figure out a way to learn, and that came through scholarship. And I was very fortunate that I could find some people who had written on the topics that I felt I needed to be able to be active and effective in my community. And that really helped me see the value of scholarship. And it has been an incredible compliment to the organizing piece. I'm studying and researching even as I'm engaging and figuring out how to do better. And for me, yes, there is a priority, and it is the organizing. That's just where my heart is, and that is what I hope will always be at the forefront of what I do. But the two complement each other. I don't see them as being opposed to each other. They both work in tandem to give us the best chance to win the kinds of changes that we're trying to make systemically.
That's an interesting answer because it indicates your focus in academia. You came into academia to study activism. Uh-oh.
Yes, it's
Do
true.
you know how far that is from what's supposed to happen? Because the academic system is designed to plug you into a job. And you've
Absolutely.
already gone in with the insight that your job is going to be a part of the process of the liberation of your people. What a heck of a statement.
And you're absolutely right. And I was a little bit naive. Okay, I was a lot naive.
We all are.
um, because I really did think that there would be more of us in academia. I really did think that, isn't everybody doing this? This is what we should be doing. And of course, found out no, that's not it. And so I've had to learn to navigate that. Look for the comrades where they exist, create some where they don't, and figure out how to keep moving forward. So for me, academia supplements what I do. It isn't the core of what I do.
Yeah, it's the same with me. Now, what's
Yeah.
interesting here is there's a generational thing going on here. This one. People like me who are coming into the movement in the 60s, there wasn't any place where we could go in academia to study this. You know what I mean? There were no courses on anything
Right.
African, let alone political struggles, let alone political organizing. There was nothing. So we had to discover this through the battlefield. And then the battlefield led us to do our own homework that really serves as kind of like the foundation for what becomes in the academy Black studies. But it was Black community studies where your teacher was your community and your enemy.
Yes.
And then the books, it was telling you about your past. So it's an interesting, I had never thought of this, that part of the intergenerational hookup is that one generation could, through fighting the power, discover who they were, discover their history, discover their past, and then create conditions where subsequent generations could actually have venues and avenues where they could actually do that formally and actually get a degree for it.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing.
It is. It is. And how exciting, right? How exciting to have people who were willing to lay that groundwork. I'm thankful every day for it. And even as we are still under attack in these kinds of programs, I think we have a whole lot to be grateful for and a lot to expand on, sure, but we've got a solid foundation, and we just have to make sure we keep using it. We have to keep using that foundation.
Yeah, good point. So give us some background in your community organizing. How long you've been organizing, where, what are some of the campaigns you've been active in, and what have been some of the outcomes?
Yeah. So I organize in very rural Southwest Virginia, and or as people popularly call us, the backwoods. That's where I do my work, and I've been working actively for about 20 years now, and we've had some wins, and there have been times when we've gotten our butts kicked. But that's the ebb and flow of organizing, right? You don't get a win every single time, but each time you learn some lessons that can help you win in the future. Because of where I'm located, most of my organizing is around housing. That's a huge issue here. and also around the school to prison pipeline, and also around the land, right? So I do quite a bit with environmental justice. We have some just horrendous things that corporations and banks are doing here as far as our land is concerned that requires a lot of time and attention. Companies wanting to bring in fracked gas pipelines. Just 2 years ago, there's a small community out in central Virginia, and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline decided that they were going to dig up this community, including its graveyards where their ancestors were buried, and put in a fracked gas pipeline that was going to just destroy this community, Black community. And the way that they came in, it was so slick, right? So they said, listen, we're going to help you out here. We know that you are a very poor community, very rural community. How about we buy out some of your land? And they framed it as, now you're going to have everything you've ever dreamed of. You're going to have a little piece of money, and you can go somewhere else and start over, right? And when you think about it, to say that to a community that has been tied to that land for generation after generation, it's not only an insult, it's just disgusting, right? But the problem was that a lot of those very, very, very poor people did see it as an opportunity to have at least something that they hadn't had before. But we were quickly able to put together a campaign. We knew it would be a fight. We knew we wouldn't be able to do it as one team, and start figuring out how to make the Atlantic Coast Pipeline Company, which was backed by Dominion Energy, the major power supply here, and Wells Fargo Bank, to abandon this pipeline project. And it took 2.5 years, and we won. They stopped all construction on the pipeline and abandoned the project. But you know how it is. As soon as you get one win, you have to start fighting something else, right? So now another pipeline has come in and decided they're going to build the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is directly through my community. So those are the kinds of things that I've been working on. The housing issue is huge here. Housing is so expensive. And the developers know that people are going to be willing to pay if they keep the supply in short demand. So we have a lot of people who become homeless, who have nowhere to go, and then we have no resources for them. Okay? We don't have shelters here, right? So anyone who becomes homeless has to depend on things like a local church to help them out. So we're doing quite a bit on housing. We have not had major wins, but some small ones. We were able, for example, this past fall, back in September, to force the town to start to build 2 low-income housing communities. And that was about a 4-year campaign. So we were successful there, but 2 communities, that's not nearly enough. It's not enough. So we still got a lot of work to do. So those are just some examples, a couple of examples of the kinds of things that we've been doing.
About how many houses get built in these 2 low-income housing communities?
Mm-hmm. So in the first one, it's a mid-sized community. We're going to have about 54 units there. And then in the second one, there's going to be 13.
Yeah, this issue of housing is really important because
it is.
With Reagan, you have the introduction of neoliberalism, which is private corporations coming in and grabbing government programs and putting them into private hands. And so he
Yes.
cuts his housing budget in half. Clinton
Yes.
eliminates low-income housing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
part of the problem there is until you have policies coming out of the federal government
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
a significant amount of money is allocated for low-income housing, that will
Yes.
continue to be the case. And across the country, you got homeless people
Yes.
um, lining
Yes.
up, and some of them
Mm-hmm.
have jobs; they just can't afford to pay for the housing. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you go out and you see them trying to get into the laundromats at night so they'll have somewhere to be. Or because we live in a heavily wooded area, you'll see them going out making tents in the forest. And it's just really sad to watch because they do work. They work. And even if they don't, they still need a place to live. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. Housing is a huge issue.
Yeah, and part of the thing is almost all the money in the federal budget is for the
Mhm.
defense budget, and it's
Yes,
now at
absolutely. Yeah.
340 billion, something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
That's just for direct military expenditure.
Hmm.
The overall defense budget is well over $1 trillion.
Hmm.
And both Democrat and Republican parties through neoliberalism are committed to the war economy. And so
Yes.
you start cutting into that budget. And right now, the talk is trying to cut social programs.
Hmm.
They claim that, that's necessary. Well,
Hmm.
there's no talk about cutting the Defense Department. That's where, you
Hmm.
could get something. So
Yeah.
that's a big fight. My experience, as I've told you, is I
Yeah.
built low-income housing
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Garvey Complex, 114 units, got
Hmm.
the land for nothing, 4 square blocks, and built it. And
Hmm.
built it through HUD. And then after, because we couldn't get the credit to get the
Hmm.
money to build that, we didn't have the money to begin with, the engineer nor me. Um, but once it was built, we put people in there, they flipped it to a cooperative.
Mm.
Now there are other issues that they have that's got to do with HUD and other kinds of political issues.
Sure.
But I think one of the things is organizers have to be skilled in this
Yeah.
and actually not only fighting to stop stuff and get stuff, but actually how to do it. Because churches are good at this. They have
Mhm.
501c3s and they build
Yes.
housing. And some of that housing is for low income people. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But that's
Absolutely.
because of their status. So that's a clear area of organizing that's very important. But it's got
Hmm.
to do with more than that, as you know. But yeah, that's housing is serious. And this country is like an underdeveloped country.
It is. It
Oh yeah,
is.
streets. It's
It
terrible.
is.
You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And increasing numbers of white people. It's not just blacks. You
I
know?
agree. Hmm.
Um, let's talk about some of the differences and similarities between the condition of black communities
Hmm.
in the 60s and the condition of black communities today. What
Hmm.
do you see as some of the things that distinguish the differences, different conditions that black people are living under
Hmm.
in these two eras?
Yeah. So I think that one of the biggest differences now is that we are considered integrated, right? So when I think about the structure of neighborhoods and who's around, I find it very difficult, especially in my area, to find anything that looks like a Black neighborhood.
Mhm.
And that is, of course, directly due to integration, and it has had implications on the schools and also on the resources. So in some instances, some of the Black people who have gone off to live in some of the wealthier neighborhoods here, you can't convince them that there are still problems because they feel like they've made it. And the others, the ones who are still struggling, they know differently. They know that no, we haven't made it. There's still a lot of problems that we have to solve. And so I see this affecting a lot of the local movements here because there is a push for movements that are all inclusive, right? So you want to bring everybody in, regardless of whether they're directly affected or not, regardless of whether they share your cultural orientation toward organizing, regardless of whether they are directly experiencing the issues and problems that the Black communities are experiencing. They say, nope, you got to have integrated movements. And so then everything turns into a conversation about allies right? and who we're going to bring in as allies. And we sometimes lose focus then on the people that should have the focus. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I see. And it's not that this to some degree wasn't present in the 1960s in movements, but I think for now it's far worse, and it's having an impact on our movements from my perspective. Yeah.
Is that true throughout Virginia, where you got basically integrated neighborhoods?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was that true before the so-called civil rights movement?
It was not.
Mm.
It wasn't. And when I listen to the stories of my parents and my grandparents, they let me know that no, it hasn't always been this way. That things were different then, and they didn't necessarily predict that things would be this difficult because of the integration movement, but I think they intuitively knew that things were not always going to be for the better because of that. And they're right. I've just seen it. They really are right about that.
You know, in the North, like a community like Harlem, for
Mhm.
example,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
Fillmore, or certain areas of Chicago and a lot of other northern areas,
Mhm,
it wasn't integration that did it in. It was attacks on Black communities,
mhm,
in part
mhm,
caused by globalization, jobs going out of the country,
mhm,
redevelopment agencies that were called at that time Negro removal,
mhm,
Black
mhm.
removal, where they were going in and destroying Black communities, or gentrification now, you know, where they're bringing in whites um, to displace
Mhm.
Blacks and then make it so expensive to live in a city
Yeah.
that a lot of Blacks are forced to move outside the city into what were suburbs, but the whites leave and those become Black communities as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
those powerful hits on Black communities have had a big effect
Yeah.
out here, more than anything else. And then with drugs being put in the Black community, a difference from what you had in the 60s by the
Mhm,
intelligence agencies,
mhm.
jobs being busted up in Black communities through Black businesses being
Yeah.
destroyed, the job becomes
Mhm.
selling drugs. And
Yes.
that was a
For sure.
counterinsurgency move. So
Mhm.
I've just I've defined this in my book, The Integration Trap, as a choice between two cultures.
Yeah.
This doesn't come from me, by the way. It comes
Mhm,
from a higher source, but it's saying that the effect of the forces that hit our people
mhm,
in the post 68 period has put us in a position of making choices sometimes that are outside our culture,
mhm,
or
mhm.
at least having to choose between the two, and often unconsciously.
Yes, I would agree. Mhm. Absolutely. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it every day.
Mhm.
And they don't always know which direction to move in, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that comes from God, by the way. Choice between two cultures, that was through the light. A lot of people get
Mhm,
spooked when I say it. Those aren't my words.
mhm,
And
mhm.
organizers that have seen this for the last 25 years, teachers, everybody, they'll say, yeah, that's what it is.
It
Because we're
is.
seeing behavior like we've never seen before. And then young people, you know, serial killers or disrespect of elders and disrespect of youth.
Mhm,
Um, and so part of this is unconscious because people don't understand what's happening.
mhm,
Because globalization, when it hits you, it's not easy to defend yourself against that. That's a
true.
corporate thing that's global.
Mhm,
How do you defend
mhm,
yourself against a job that sustained
mhm,
your family, that kept you going, and suddenly it's flown off to China? Now,
mhm,
how do you deal with that?
mhm,
And so we went from 75% two-parent households for 100 years, 1865 to 1968, to 29% now.
mhm,
That was
mhm,
more damaging than anything slavery did.
mhm.
And so then the youth now are in a position where a lot of them don't see a father. it's not unusual to have a single parent household, but it was 25% for 100 years. Now it's rare to see a father. So what is a man? All these kind of things come up. I think it's a testament to the strength of our people and our culture that resistance would still go on in
Yeah.
those circumstances. It's saying that younger people, a lot of them, however confused it may be and everything else, have made some pretty good cultural choices. What do you
I
think?
agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's an overall push, right, for us to rethink what a family is. And people are really being affected by this and are really struggling. Definitely your choice of words, as always, it's perfect, right? It is a choice between two cultures. And if we don't have enough people who are teaching our way, the choice becomes really easy for them. Right?
Mhm.
They're going to go with what the mainstream society says they should want and tells them they should need. And I think we're seeing that. Another thing that I have noticed, and I'd be interested in hearing your position on this, a lot of the people working in movements now, especially the younger people, are resisting any form of hierarchy, right? So they don't want any top-down structure in organizations. They don't want a president. They don't want a chair of a committee. They want everybody in the organization to be on exactly equal footing. Very flat organizations, and really believe that that reduces conflict over who's going to be in a position, conflict over who's going to have power in the organization. um, and they're also figuring out that as they're working out these structures, that there are multiple ways to build an organization. Sometimes it may work and sometimes it may not. Um, but because the organizations are so flat, because there is no real hierarchy, sometimes they really don't get the benefits of being an organization. They're just a group of people who have decided to come together and work on some issues from time to time. Um, and so I'm just interested in hearing what you think about that, because organizations looked a lot different in the 50s, 60s, and 70s than they do now.
So you're suggesting one problem. So what do you think about it first?
Yeah.
Overall, what's
Um,
your overall view?
yeah, I don't know. I get what they're saying about how positions and power dynamics have sometimes worked to our detriment in organizations, and in fact has made us sitting ducks at some times. And once your leaders disappear, then the organizations just fall off, and don't continue the work. On the other hand, I think this push for anti-structure can be very damaging, right? It doesn't help the organizers to build any kind of trust among each other. Um, it doesn't leave something for those who will come after them. And I don't think that their ideas are always on point with that. And so I've struggled with this, and that's why I'm asking you. I've struggled with being able to understand, on the one hand, why they feel they need completely flat organizations, but also knowing that there are a lot of cons to organizing that in that way. Um, so, yeah, I don't have an answer for them. Maybe
Yeah,
you
that's
do.
interesting. Well, it's good because when you're open like that,
Yeah.
then it leads you to consider various options and various
Yes.
alternatives. I predicted this about 30 years ago in the National
Mm,
Black United Front.
mm,
I told them that this era of charismatic leadership was as
mhm,
dead as a mule driven apparatus. You know what I mean? This ain't the mule age anymore. So on the one hand, the 60s, previous periods, we had organizations that had centralized leadership, whether
Yes.
elected or not,
Yeah.
very often elected. And so a lot spun around the leadership, even though there was input, varying input depending on the organizations. So there were positives to this. I mean, like you point out, things happened that actually produced change that was good. Malcolm X and others were able to do some things. King was able to do some things as spokespeople for the movement. But once you took these people out, those movements really went down. You know what I mean? And that was also true with the Garvey movement as well. But they served their purpose at the time. So what I think is that because of the way in which Black communities have been attacked and fragmented, the way in which families have been weakened, that it would give rise to this kind of sentiment. And also a breakdown of confidence in authority, Black authority, would arise out of that as well, because people aren't seeing it in their lives, they're not seeing it in their families, and so a lot of them aren't seeing it in their communities. So I think the positive of this negative is that group-centered leadership, which was the Ella Baker model, and what Black Lives Matter calls leaderful, the positive of that is that it allows for organizing in broken situations, in upside down situations, where communities are upside down, and where people can come together and begin to deal with things, and where there are not real strong organizations that you can draw from. So there are multiple of groups that are interacting, networking, and all this kind of stuff. So I think that that's a natural response to that, but it's also a cultural response that has deep roots in Africa, which is the smallest societies tended to be organized like that. They didn't have identifiable leadership at the village level. On the hunter-gatherer period, these were usually small organizations, but they also provided the greatest input for people, and they provided the best lifestyles in Africa. So that's the positive, some of the positives of that. And it's an expression of the culture, because the culture is very democratic. I don't care what level it's on. We got to have a say so. But I get the point. And I'm really, I really respect how you're approaching this analysis, because you're looking at the positives and the negatives. And so, there are negatives. Now, another positive is the intelligence agencies get awful confused when they're dealing with something that they can't really identify as clear leadership that they can circle around, attack, or buy off.
It's true.
So
very true.
I think that's another advantage of it. So, but I'm looking at what you're saying and seeing that there's some other things that need to be looked at. So I think you've got a point there. But I think it's understandable that they would feel this way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do, but we do have to be aware of the cons, so that nothing, when it comes off, nothing is really shocking to us. We can say, oh, okay, we considered that.
Right on. In the context of organizing today, what's the age groups that are active in organizing right now? And when you say that activists are more economically, we're having a conversation, you made this comment, that activists are more economically inclusive today. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So most of the folks that I work with are young. Frontline workers are teenagers, right? So got 17-year-olds who are very, very active, all the way up to 30, 35 years old. We do have some older than that, of course, but they are the minority. For the most part, it is the younger people about 17 to 30 that are consistently the core of the group. And what I meant by economically inclusive is that we have in our Black communities here, especially being a town that is quite rural, a lot of Black poor people. And that is sometimes seen as being at odds with those who do live here and are Black and middle class. And what I've seen from a lot of the movements here is that the two come together, not always without conflict. There have been some fights around economic positionality and what that means. But as the communities are moving forward, they're figuring out that they have to try to figure it out together and work together. And so that's what I meant by economically inclusive. It's not just one economic class that is doing most of the work. We're seeing a lot of involvement from very, very, very poor people to people who are very well off.
Yeah, that's good. That's a mischaracterization of the Black freedom movement. It was all middle class. It was made up of different sectors of Blacks. You know what I mean, student sectors who were in between class, a lot of working Blacks, a lot of unemployed Blacks, middle class Blacks. I remember James Farmer, who was national director of the Congress of Racial Equality, had a debate with Malcolm. And Malcolm tried to characterize the civil rights movement as being made up of house Negro. By the way, this is a little side note. Malcolm's great-great-great-grandfather, Ajar, was a house slave. But he didn't fit Malcolm's stereotype, and I think Malcolm knew that all Blacks didn't. He was a 6'4" Bambara warrior, and he was a house slave because he was a skilled builder, you know. But, you know, the key point is, Farmer's comeback was no, C.O.R.E and S.N.C.C, these groups, particularly C.O.R.E and S.N.C.C, it was a multifaceted when it came to social structure makeup, middle class, grassroots. It was a mixture, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
Yeah, but those but when you put those together, you can have problems.
Yes.
No doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But to be willing to work through that, I think, is part of learning how to work in movements. Everybody isn't going to be like you. Everybody's not going to have your background. But can you figure out a way to stay focused on your common goals and objectives so that the group gets the win? And I'm just really happy that I'm seeing people willing to do that.
Right on.
Yes.
It means you've had a lot of patience in your work.
There is no other way, right? One of the key characteristics of a good
Kind of
organizer,
like
if you are
parenting.
patient. That's right.
Not that they're children, but it's kind of like parenting.
It is.
So, you know, we had a discussion, and you were discussing something very interesting, and that was about, because you're talking about 17 to 30, the age group that you're dealing with, which is very important that people at such a young age are engaged. I mean, that is really important because that's what really drives social change anyway, generally young people. So what are some of the characteristic attitudes that organizers today have about struggle? Because you were going through some of those, which I found very, very interesting.
Yeah. This is one of the areas that, for me, has created some difficulty because there are some who really, really feel like there shouldn't be a struggle at this point.
Yeah, right.
That I shouldn't have to get up and go fight a battle. I shouldn't have to think every day about making moves that are one step ahead or figuring out how to stave off attacks. I shouldn't have to do that. I just want to, as some of them tell me, I just want to go live my best life, right? And so there is some resistance there, even as they recognize that there is still so much to do. They just kind of resent having to be the ones to do it. And there's the opposite as well. There are some who come in and they are just so passionate about continuing the work, and they understand that they won't be able to complete it, but they're willing to dedicate the time and energy necessary to continue it. But it wears on them sometimes, right? And they get into all of these discussions about self-care and burnout, right? And sometimes, it's after 2 protests, and they said, "Look, I'm gonna go take some time for self-care. I'm burnt out." And or they come to a meeting, and we're supposed to be focused during that time on working on our strategy and our plans, and they take up the whole first hour and a half of the meeting talking about, I just need to be here and have some self-care. They don't want to necessarily get to the reason why we're there. And so I'm hearing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of that from folks who are in movements. And I think it's to be expected. And we're, of course, certainly in social media era. And a lot of this comes to them from that. And they're trying to figure it out. How much time should they be dedicating? Should movements be their life, right? And when I unequivocally tell them that it has to be, they don't always understand that. They don't understand that, and it's not something that you can go home at 5 o'clock and turn off. And they want to be able to do that, right? I put my time in for today, and now I'm not that until tomorrow at 10 a.m. Right? So those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing from the young people who really have a different perspective of struggle, I think. Yet at the same time are still committed. They're still doing the work. Yeah.
So you made another comment about their view about the long term, a significant number of them. What's that?
Yeah. These folks have a lot of patience. And what I'm noticing is that most of them understand that this is not a quick fix. Organizing isn't for people who want the answer tomorrow, because it's not going to happen. It's a commitment to long-term planning, long-term resistance, long-term direct actions. And through that work over time, you make the sustainable changes, the kinds of systemic changes that don't just disappear the minute you step away. And I'm really, really, really proud of a lot of the youth for having at least that much understanding of movements and being committed to longer term action and knowing that it's not going to happen instantly.
Yeah, I've noticed that in some of the literature and some of the discussions I've had with younger people who have an activist orientation, some of them thought that the movements of the 60s should have produced that freedom.
Right.
Why? And that. And then putting down the generation that produced more than any generation prior to it, not because it was better, but because of the circumstances. World War II, post-World War II conditions enabled Africa to become independent. The European was weakened. And inside the United States, it gave us maneuvering room. You know? My father couldn't do what I did, not because he wasn't as militant, he was more militant, but because the circumstances restricted it. You know what I mean? A lynch rope and no movements at that point. So, I think that's part of the disappointment. And even in the movement, when we first got into it, the slogan was freedom now. How naive people get. That was the slogan. Yes. And then people had to come to the realization it ain't now, though there are things you can achieve now. But this
Yes.
point that you got people who are also hanging in uh,
Yeah.
for the long term, you better, because this is not the 50-yard dash. That's your point.
Exactly. Exactly. And you have to pace yourself. You
Yeah.
have to pace yourself as you're working through the campaigns and figuring things out. And that takes, though, a lot of discipline. And that's sometimes difficult with youth, right? That's sometimes difficult. But from what I'm seeing, there is a solid core out there that really does get it. And they understand that this is long term.
Yeah. What I suggest is, and this comes over time, but
Yeah.
one of the things that enables people to sustain themselves is pacing yourself in balance. You need
Yes.
to develop balance. And that means that the hardcore like you even, that
Mhm.
means that you have to have built in to your life some
Mhm.
balance where you got things you
Yes.
enjoy that you do
Mhm. Mhm.
and tending to your health that you do.
Mhm.
And there's
Absolutely.
time you take off
Mhm.
that you do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I reached a point, it was 1972, 12 years. I just started teaching at state and we
Mhm.
had a headquarters. We had bought a building, Malcolm X Unity House, and I'm dragging my feet. I'm tired.
Yeah.
My head is tired. My nose is running. I'm just feeling run down. Well, that's 12 years, actually 13 of continuous struggle. So I went to a holistic doctor and got some
Mm.
diagnosis on what was happening. So I went on a mega vitamin thing,
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
potassium to
Okay.
deal with the brain,
Mhm.
vitamin C,
Mhm.
various and I've been on that since 72. And
Okay.
then I decided to do some things I like to do. One of which
Mhm.
is I never liked driving, but I had a friend who had a TR4, a sports car, ugly looking little thing. He was 70 odd years old, had been a boxer. He was still boxing in his 70s, just playing
Mhm.
around. And he
Yeah.
was a house painter. And he
Mhm.
had this really mangly looking TR4. And I got in it. And when that car went through the gears, I said, "Oh, yeah." I went home to my wife and I said, "I want to get a sports car," because we couldn't do anything unless we both agreed. Anything over $150. That was a joint decision. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And
Mhm.
so she said, "Yeah." So I got me a TR6, a green TR6. I don't even like green, but I didn't know what colors I liked them. But I liked the feel of that car. So that was like not an escape, but it's
Mhm.
something I enjoyed doing. And then I
Mhm.
started taking vacations,
Mm.
3 weeks
Mm.
every year, 3 weeks, not two, not one, mostly to Africa or to Mexico or the
Mhm.
Caribbean, but
Mhm.
mostly Africa, you
Mhm.
know, but that
Mhm.
balance and then doing
Mhm.
other things. And then with my wife now, she is basically a balanced person. So we're going to do social stuff and I enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
you've got to build that in because
Mhm.
one,
Mhm.
you need perspective and, you need some time out and stuff, but to last, but for your health, you've got to really work
Mhm.
on that health because a lot of movement people have health problems, a lot of
Yes. Of course.
stress problems.
Of course.
In the 60s, it was bleeding ulcers, high blood pressure.
Mhm.
People were in the South who were facing death
Mhm.
almost every day.
Mhm. Yeah.
That was almost going along with the organizing. So that
Mhm.
balance is
Mhm.
really key. And don't care what people who are like you think, because a
Mhm.
lot of them will say, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that." People told me I shouldn't be driving a sports car. That's not revolutionary. I told them I didn't know a car had an ideology, but I can tell you the revolutionary that's driving it, and it's revolutionary because mostly you don't think I should, and I am. So I'm changing something here. But I don't care 2 cents what you think.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
making me feel good. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So you got to have
Yes.
that. You got to
Yeah.
have that. I think they got
Yeah.
a point. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, you need this only occurs over time as organizers think through what they're doing. They're engaged in struggle. Uh,
Mhm.
you need to begin to shape. I don't mean you, young people. Over time, I think it'll happen, and some already are doing it. Long-term vision.
Yeah.
Where do
Yeah.
you think this thing is going down the road? what do you want to produce as real change that will produce freedom for our people? And
Yeah.
that needs to be tied into what you're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of your strategy, right? You have to think about what are your short term, your intermediate, and your long term goals, and you got to have all three, right? You have to think about the here and now because the needs are immediate, right? So when somebody is facing an eviction, in danger of being out on the streets, that's an immediate need, and we have to be able to plan for that. But yes, you have to have a vision for what you want your world to look like 20 years from now, 50 years from now, long after you are gone. What is it that you want to leave behind? And I don't think you can have any adequate strategy without that kind of a long term vision. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
Um, we'll conclude this now. There were other questions, but I think this is
Okay.
sufficient. But you had I think, an overall view that I thought was very interesting and practical about what you see as what you think people really want
Mm-hmm.
to have a sustainable life. What is
Mm-hmm.
that for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, for me, I have to know that the people around me are safe, that all of the threats to their quality of life and their existence are at bay. And that's what we fight for, right? We want the people that we love to be happy and healthy and to be safe and to know that they don't have to think about harm constantly. And as long as I feel that, I feel satisfaction, right? I feel that whatever we face in movements is always worth it, so long as the people that we love are okay. And that's what it's all about, for me at least.
And you had made some other comments about people should be able to live a good life and
Yes,
have the
yes,
basic needs met
no doubt.
over your
Right.
head, uh,
Hmm.
a good income, to lead
Yep.
a normal life and be happy about it, which means free of oppression.
Yes, yes, that little thing, right? Yeah, right. People struggle so much for so little. And that's what we're trying to get past. No one should have to worry that tomorrow there may not be any food in the refrigerator, or tomorrow they might get that notice on the door, or that the electricity might be disconnected in the middle of a horrendous winter like we're having here in Virginia, right?
Mhm.
So just those little things, and to me that's just about humanity. It's about being able to live with dignity as a human being. And what really is your quality of life if you don't have that level of dignity?
Mhm. This is also where I think the past is a key link to the present and the future because
Mhm, mhm,
some of us who study African history and
mhm,
African American history and culture, um, it's an academic thing or it's a thing that we're really proud. It makes us proud, and that's good.
mhm.
But there's also the need for us to look at what we've created in our
Mhm.
history that's in our DNA. Because
Yes,
basically, being humane, that's
yes.
us.
That's the
That's
African way.
you know.
That is the
So,
African way,
mhm.
to be able to see
So
ourselves in
looking
each
at
other.
how is it that we could create societies with no jail,
Yeah.
no poverty,
Hmm.
no abuse of women or children
Yes.
or the old or anybody? You know what I mean?
Yes. Absolutely.
Largely peaceful. Though if
Mhm.
we had to fight, then we were in a position where we were prepared to. We had ways to do that. But the key point is this is where I think also, whether you're an organizer or not,
Mhm.
drawing from your past gives you some vision of what
Yes.
you could do before that should give you some ideas of what you can do even more of today and tomorrow. What do you
Mhm.
think about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And we have to have those connections. We have to be able to tap into that legacy. We have to be able to understand how our people viewed the world, what justice looked like to them, right? I know we like to have these big, long philosophical debates over these kinds of terms, but the answer is right there in our culture. And that's one of the things that we have to recognize. But you have to be connected enough, right, to be able to extract that from your history. And I think the more that we can do that, the better positioned we are to actually be successful as we organize and as we fight to win. Yeah, I'm with you on
Yeah,
that.
because organizing is about people making power,
Yes,
history through
yes,
exercising power, and studying
absolutely,
your past is the history you've already made. So one
absolutely.
complements the other, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, they go together so nicely.
Mhm.
I agree.
And it's healthy to have victories.
Yes,
Victory
yeah, yeah,
really,
you can't always
especially with
lose.
blood pressure, victories are really good for your psychological health.
Yes. Mhm,
Victories are really good. You know what I mean?
mhm,
And
mhm.
if you think you've had none, that's not good for your emotional,
Yeah.
psychological health, period, because you have. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Absolutely. Nobody's gonna stay in a movement and they always lose. They're not
Exactly.
gonna stay. No way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Brandy, this has been wonderful,
It has. Thank you so
outstanding,
much. Mhm.
insightful. I've learned a lot.
Me too.
So there are a few comments here that
Okay.
one is Higher Hecka. Should most Black organizations be tied linked to the Black church?
Mhm. That's a very interesting question. My immediate response is no, because there is a lot of divisiveness that comes out of that. What I'm seeing with a lot of youth is that they aren't tied to that anymore. And so there have to be other avenues. I think the church historically has been very good in some ways in helping movements sustain themselves and get some victories. No doubt about that. But it can't be the only way. And for the people who would rather not take that avenue, there have to be some alternatives. So our movements can't just be tied to a church as an institution.
Yeah, especially since this is the largest sector of any Black population that's
Yeah.
unchurched,
Hmm.
even though a large sector are.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what's real interesting in this is that a sizable number of those are sisters.
Hmm. Yeah.
By the way, we didn't discuss this, and I think we need to just touch on this one. What
Okay.
do you see as the main reason that sisters are playing a more prominent role in these movements today? What do you see as
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
major
Hmm.
reason?
Hmm. I think one of the reasons is because they're recognizing the ways in which they're directly affected by the issues, sometimes disproportionately. And the other reason is because they have no choice. When they look around to their left and right and they see no men, you either just hang it up or you say, all right, there's a role for me here. I need to be able to do it. And so I think both of those are playing into that. And as they get a sense of their own power and some efficacy and some wins, they start to realize that they can be very effective. So I think that's what's going on.
And that's correcting an imbalance that we had in the 60s where
Yes.
overabundance of male leadership and
Hmm.
with some the
Hmm.
patriarchal mentality that
Hmm.
uh, women should be seen but not heard, but the women
Right.
were picking up the movement. The March on Washington, not a single sister as a speaker. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Just as one example.
Yes.
Or Ella Baker, when she comes in to
Yeah.
be the first executive director of S.C.C., the kind of opposition she faced
Hmm.
for a lot of reasons, mainly
Hmm.
because she was a Black woman, older, more experienced, but she also had a philosophy of leadership very different. So it was a problem on different levels. So
Yeah.
also, I think the breakdown of Black families where the load has been put more heavily on sisters,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's going to be expressed in movements.
Yes. No doubt. Hmm.
and the fact that the sisters who were leading are out there fighting for brothers and their brothers involved. But
No doubt.
particularly, most of these police killings, for example, are brothers.
Yeah.
And it's sisters out there because of their love for their people and their men who are standing up and brothers. But it's
Mhm.
sisters who are playing a vital role in this. And I think that's great.
Mhm. I agree.
Great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. Norman Brown. This is the guy that woke me up, Norman here. He was my vice chair in C.O.R.E.
Oh, wow.
Tell Brandy about the rotating leadership the type used in Downtown Merchants Challenge. Are you familiar with groups that do rotating leadership, Brandy?
No, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar with it, so I
Oh,
guess
okay.
thought that I would know about this, but it would seem like
Okay.
that would be a situation where you're not having a singular leadership, so it's rotating.
Mhm.
Uh,
And
how
I'm,
that
I'm guessing there is a way of determining whose turn it is and for how long and the
right?
like. It
Yeah,
sounds like it may be that way. I'd
yeah,
definitely be interested in hearing more. Maybe
yeah,
if he could reach out and be willing to talk to me about that.
yeah. I think it's interesting you're organizing in circumstances similar to where you were raised.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh-huh.
I am.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. 5-star review. Um, yeah, this is the one. Dr. King questioned integration. He knew he made a mistake by leading us in that direction. 5-star review. You want to comment on that one?
No, I think that sometimes when you're in a situation and you think there's only one way out of it, one way forward, you tend to dismiss what could be some of the unintended and in some instances the intended consequences of those kinds of decisions. We can see this, for example, when we go back and look at Thurgood Marshall's papers. As he was fighting for integration, he was one who recognized that there were going to be some problems and that they were going to be rather severe. Um, but it's the path that they chose because that's what they believed was necessary at the time. And now, of course, those of us who are the children and grandchildren of this, and I even hesitate to say integrated. It's only integrated in some instances, right? There's some things that still remain very much unintegrated. But for those of us who are the product of that, we are the ones who have to figure out how to deal with it. How do we understand our existence in this society that takes us away from each other and tells us that we shouldn't be with each other, that the way is to have everybody included. Um, and I think we are figuring it out. And I don't know that we have the answers, but at least we do recognize that, yeah, there's some problems, some very real problems that came with integration. But where do we go next? And that's always the challenge. It's one thing to recognize it, it's another to have a plan for being able to navigate it.
Yeah, for the most part, blacks are not integrated in America,
Right. Exactly.
and that's a great thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's a great thing.
Hmm.
Um, and for example, it's a complex thing when you're talking about integration. And
Yes.
5-star is right. King
Hmm.
did say that he had made a mistake of telling blacks to integrate into a burning house,
Yep.
but there's a contradiction there
Hmm.
because, for example, King's whole life was black. He was raised in a black community,
Hmm.
went to a black church, black family, black
Yeah.
schools, except for graduate school. You know,
Hmm.
so his world was a black world,
Hmm.
and his major advisors were black. He had a few whites, but they were mainly black. He was an expression of African American black middle class culture. You know,
Yeah.
so on the one hand, he was talking integration, but on the other hand, his life was not that, you know.
Right.
So, but to the extent that his language encouraged that,
Yeah.
he was correct to conclude that he needed to back off of that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So let's see if there's anything else here. 5-star saying we need secret societies. You know, that's why you shouldn't be talking about it. I agree. By the way, Kyra Hatcher, glad to have you, Kyra. We need to learn how to reach the people only concerned with the instant gratification aspect. Until we find a way to hop that hurdle, I don't know if we'll ever really move forward. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I hear you on the instant gratification part. It is troubling in movements and can actually derail them. At the same time, though, these are people who are dealing with very real and immediate needs, and those can't be dismissed, right? You're going to be hard pressed to ask somebody to come fight with you when they're hungry, right? Or when they don't understand that there's a bigger and long-term vision. So you're not wrong. Your comment is not wrong, and that is where the listening, I think, comes in. You have to listen to see what those immediate needs are, and to the best of your ability, try to meet them. Right. So we have a very, very strong mutual aid component in our organizing. We try to make sure that people aren't in danger of being kicked out of their places, that they aren't in danger of not having food. We fundraise, we give, whatever we can do to satisfy that immediate need so that they are able to focus on the longer term goals and objectives. So you're right. We have to talk. We have to figure out how to move people to the next part of the process. But I'm very hesitant to dismiss immediate need because they aren't making it up, right? It's not that they are making these things up or just want to be stuck in the here and now. It's because the system that we're in has produced a lot of people who have immediate needs. And we just can't dismiss that. But I hear you. I definitely hear you and understand your point.
One of the comments you were making last night was that one of the distinguishing characteristics of young people who are involved in movements today is that there are people who are directly affected. These are people who are undergoing various problems that they're addressing through organizing. You comment on that?
Yes, yes. And they're working together to figure out how to solve them. In other words, for me, it's watching them come out of isolation. So they've been struggling and trying to deal with the problems on their own because American society tells us that's what we should do. It's about you being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and hunker down and make the best of a terrible situation. And they are not suffering in silence anymore. They're stepping forward to say, this is what is happening to me, and it's not just. And they look around and other people are saying, oh, really? I thought I was the only one. It's happening to me too. And they're starting to talk to each other and recognize their common interests. And that's what they're organizing around. And nobody's coming in to tell them, this is what you should be fighting for. This is what you should be doing. It's not about that. It's about them having a sense of their own power and being able to cultivate that among each other and realize that when they do, they're stronger, they're better, they can build and they can win. And it's just, for me, it's just phenomenal to see their faces light up when they're able to accomplish things that they never thought possible. And they're winning. They're winning.
And they're in the best position to understand how to do it.
Yes.
And being engaged in struggles where they are, builds their self-confidence, builds their sense of power, and then other things happen with that kind of
Yes.
thing. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's very
Absolutely.
important. You know, you don't have the victim mentality anymore. You know,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Absolutely. That efficacy and that confidence goes a long way. Sometimes it can sustain you even when you're taking some losses, to know that you can. Right? You can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to end this, lady.
Okay.
I've learned a lot from you. I know the people listening to you have,
I
and
hope
proud
so.
of your work. You keep on doing it.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
we're hooking up from now on. It's a hook
Yes.
there.
Yes.
You got that?
One that I welcome. I welcome it.
So do I. So
Yes.
do I.
Thank
Right
you.
on. So I know you all enjoyed this. You got a lot out of this. It's showing how heavy our people are. Look at this here. This is one bad sister here. We got a whole lot of them out there. Huh?
Because of people like you, you have done so much for us, and publicly, thank you for that. Thank you for all that you've done and contributed.
Well, and I thank the people that helped me grow,
Mhm.
everyday people who nobody's ever heard about,
Mhm.
uh, who gave me my lessons, spanked me sometimes,
Yeah.
corrected me sometimes.
Part of the process.
Uh, so that's been the growth. And I'm like you, scholarship's important, but the whatever you can achieve in working with your people to make life better, that
Yes.
is the most important thing.
Yes. No doubt about it.
Yeah,
No doubt.
I sign on. Right on. Well, thank you, lady.
Absolutely.
See y'all next week. And I'll be talking to you at another time.
Okay. Bye bye,
Okay,
everybody.
bye.